This program is brought to you by thepodcastfactory.com.
Canine Crew, it's time to just sell the damn thing. Doberman Dan is revealing his contrarian formula for getting a rush of new customers, building your business faster, and making the highest possible profits. Go to justsellthedamnthing.com to get your copy today.
Prepare yourself for the uncensored, nothing held back, no BS reality of how business and life really work. Doberman Dan is off the chain.
So let's just dive in. I have no clue what we're going to talk about, but you know me, I can chat.
Yeah, I gave you no agenda whatsoever.
Yes,
and you probably want to know why. Because I have no agenda. I just have questions for you that I want to start talking
let's hit
about.
Record.
So I already hit mine.
Listen to this guy. He just comes to the show and he thinks he can say when we record. That's cute.
He's just taking over, man.
Yeah, right?
He's just, so I'll add that. I'll add that to my list of people who should be.
We are.
I was going to say people who should be corrected, spanked, maybe.
Well,
people who come on my podcast and start telling us what to do. Those people
shouting
should be
out
spanked,
order,
along with
that's a brand new Doberman Dan podcast that involves leashes and spanking.
That's my other podcast. That we do that one at night.
All right, but we're entrepreneurs because we don't follow rules, right?
That's right. What this is about, man. This is for people who don't want to follow rules. So now I'll get a bunch of sociopath listeners, I guess. Roy Furr, ladies and gentlemen, Roy Furr, copywriter extraordinaire. I think I'd heard your name previously, but you and I didn't connect until you wrote the copy for Brian Kurt's event, the Titans of Direct Response Marketing.
Yes.
Because I asked him, dude, I first asked Brian, did you write that? Because I was going to say, Brian, you've been in the wrong business. You should have been a copywriter. And he said, no, it's this young guy named Roy Furr. And then you and I connected shortly after that, didn't we?
I think so. And your name had definitely been on my radar quite a bit because of the whole Halbert connection and all of that any serious student of direct response has probably come across your name a few times, even, before 2014, before this podcast, before all of that. But yeah, I think that's where we connected. You and Paris Lampropoulos. Paris calls up Brian, and Brian says, "Yeah, Paris." Paris says, "I need to talk to you about the sales letter. Did you write that?" And Brian gave him the same response as he gave you, and the rest is kind of history, because that's where I've connected with a lot of folks, was through a sales letter that moved many of my heroes to actually fork over thousands of dollars and come to that event.
Well, before we get into how you got that gig, let's get the whole backstory on how you came into this thing. Because I've yet to meet anybody who said, well, when I was in 6th grade, I decided to become a copywriter or direct response marketer. I've yet to hear that story. So what is yours?
Yeah, so I always knew I was a writer of some sort, because in college, I was self-publishing a book of poetry, but ultimately, like most self-published books of poetry, my family buying copies was the only way that I made any money off of it. And then I got a real job, which was answering phone calls in the local gas company's customer service call center. And those phone calls were you when you didn't pay your gas bill all winter, and we came out on the first warm day of spring and shut off your service. It was you calling me to blame me because you didn't pay your bill and now you didn't have any gas. And so I got screamed at quite a bit, but I also took time between calls to read some books, because I just gotten my degree, and I had my undergrad in psychology, but realized that I wasn't going to get a good job in psychology unless I wanted to go to years more of school. But then I found a book called The Well-Fed Writer, and it talked about these people who were writers that worked for companies and got paid much better than the average writer, just to write corporate communications, basically. And he also talked about these ragtag renegades who did this thing called direct response. And he said he wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but there were a lot of folks who called themselves copywriters who wrote ads and sales letters and all that stuff. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. And I mean, from there, it was just down the rabbit hole. That was at the very beginning of 2005. Within 6 months, I had a full-time job running marketing for a IT training publisher, blew that business up. They were already doing well, but we tripled them over the next 4 years or so. And then in 2010, I went out on my own as a full-time freelancer. I'd been doing a little bit on the side, and it's always looking up since then.
That's cool. So The Well-Fed Writer, I remember that book. Isn't it interesting how he talked down about direct response copywriting?
Yeah, well, he came from the camp where ultimately, I feel like I live in the results economy, and I know that there are a lot of people who don't want to live in the results economy for one reason or another. It can feel very uncertain to not judge your potential income based on the results you're able to generate, but instead on the time and effort that you put in. And so, he said that I think for him, it was a good decision. Maybe it sounded like he was happy with it, but he wanted to just be able to write a project for a certain amount and he'd be happy with it. Well, me, I had been in sales previous to that, but I never considered myself a salesperson. But when I figured out that I guess that I didn't have to go out in the grocery store and try and get people to sign up for the local newspaper subscription, but instead could hide behind my keyboard and write some things and make people respond. Well, that sounded all right to me.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool deal.
Yeah.
You don't have to talk to people and deal with them face to face.
The funny thing is the higher up I get in this industry, the more I realize that everybody who actually does anything worth of note ends up being very comfortable selling, in person or face to face or on the phone or whatever. I mean, you and I here are having this conversation, and of course, we're not on the podcast just to make a pitch or make offers, but to some degree, we are selling ourselves through this conversation. And so all that background in sales, even though I was never great at it at that point, has come back and benefited me.
Oh, for sure. And, a freelance copywriter who wants to just hide behind their keyboard and just write stuff should not be a freelancer. If that's all they want to do, they should probably just get an in-house job as a copywriter. Like
Absolutely.
Core Financial would be my recommendation because those guys rock. But if somebody wants to be a freelancer and not sell, I mean, you're going to be regularly selling people if it's not in person, then it's over the phone on 5-figure services. So
well, yeah,
it ain't
I'll tell you, I have never. So today, if you want to hire me, and you can't, but today, if you want to hire me to do copywriting work to build a campaign for your business, it's basically a minimum $20,000 check, and that's a flat fee. And then starting with the first dollar in sales, you're going to pay me a percentage of the revenue that I'm generating for your business. And I have not closed a single one of those sales where I haven't met the person in person, face to face, or gotten on the phone with them for an extended conversation. And at the same time, I write that copy and I do sell things to typically a much bigger list at a much smaller response rate. I sell things anywhere from $29, even below $10, all the way up to thousands of dollars with copy alone. But for the most part, you have to be comfortable getting on the phone with somebody. You have to get over that. We're all just human beings. We're all just children inside trying to figure ourselves out, trying to become. Your client is just as insecure as you are in different ways. And you have to be willing to get on the phone and be a human and figure out if they have a problem that you can help them solve, right?
Absolutely. when you first started freelancing, not when you were working for that first company you mentioned, when you first started freelancing, what were some of the challenges you faced as far as, well, selling yourself, getting gigs when you did get interest, closing them on paying you a big fee and royalty to hire you? Or was it just all smooth sailing and just things went wonderfully from the beginning?
Well, let me address this from a couple different angles. The first client that I ever got, I went back and I looked at this not too long ago. I had a so I had approached the guy and been like, "Hey, I'm interested in your work. I'm interested in your work," and we had gone back and forth a little bit, but I had never made a clear and compelling offer to him. And so one day I sat down and I said, all right, it's time to change this. And I wrote what I have called my irresistible offer letter. And I said, David, I challenge you to a duel. Now, for context, this is David Bullock, who is still a good friend to this day. He was the Taguchi testing expert that Kim McCarthy and Perry Marshall were promoting through their work. So he's pretty high level, but kind of David will kick me for this, but like a second level guru in this space, right? He was a guest guru being brought in by these other people, but he was a marketing testing expert. And I had the audacity to say, David, I challenge you to a duel. I would like to write a new sales letter for your program that's all about marketing testing. And I actually don't want you to pay me to write this sales letter. I actually don't want you to pay me to test this sales letter. I only want you to pay me if I write it, you like it enough to test it, and in testing, it beats what you're using right now. In that case, here is the fee that I would like you to pay me only after it's been proven to make you more money. And I'll tell you what, prior to making a clear, compelling offer like that, I wasn't getting any traction with freelance clients. But when I made that clear, compelling offer, my phone was ringing in 5 minutes. and David said yes. And I worked my butt off. And I wrote something that David loved. And it sold more copies of his program. And I got my fee for it. And even actually Ken McCarthy approached David and said, David, who wrote that? Because it's really good. So the biggest challenge that I think that a lot of folks have that at the very beginning is not knowing where you provide value and then not making a clear and compelling offer around that value. So if you find somebody who's running an advertisement that you think that you can beat, or a sales letter or whatever, and you actually stand up and say, listen, I will beat this, and if I don't beat it, you don't have to pay me. Well, it's very hard for any serious marketer to turn you down in that regard. It's, you're probably at least an occasional student at Dean Jackson. He talks about what would you do if you had to deliver the value that your product or service promises before your customer or client pays you. What would you implement to make it definite that they're going to get that value? And in some cases, especially if you're new, especially if you're trying to build your reputation or your portfolio or whatever, actually making an offer that's so risk weighted in their favor is the best way to do it. I mean, ultimately, my clients are taking on a huge risk even when they hire me today that I'm going to write something that bombs. Now, I have a lot of experience that decreases that risk. That's why I get paid more per project than I used to. And they do things that decrease that risk. But you have to look from the client perspective. What risk are you asking them to take on, and how can you alleviate that risk? So yeah, my first big challenge was just, I wasn't getting any traction until I figured out how to make offers. And then a little bit later on, I realized that despite some early successes, I kind of sucked when it came to writing long form copy.
Did you really?
Yeah. Well, I did what a lot of copywriters do, and I was basically trying to throw everything in the kitchen sink at people. Like, here's everything you should be interested in. Here's all the great things about this product. Here's this and that. But you know Mark Ford, or his pen name Michael Masterson. He teaches the power of one. And so like AWAI was a client that I recognized was kind of in the middle of the whole copywriting industry. I used to jokingly call them the Agora Training School, which is not inaccurate, especially when you look at how many Agora affiliated companies go to their boot camp and hire copywriters out of their program, and the fact that it's Agora insiders who built AWAI. So I knew that I wanted to work with AWAI, and so I would do a bunch of spec challenges for them. But what happened is Katie Yackel, she often would send my copy back and just say, like, Roy, this isn't, we can tell you're a good writer, but this isn't good copy. We can tell you're a good writer, but this isn't good copy. And it was always because I was trying to do too much. I was trying to teach too much. I was trying to include too much in there, when really I needed to focus on that one compelling narrative that was going to move people that was going to stir them to take action. And it wasn't until I found that I discovered, like, tell more about less, not less about more. That
makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And it was really almost instantaneous. Once I did that and figured out how to structure a really compelling sales argument around one single big idea, like that's what tipped the scales. And it was, from that point forward, I was able to pay my bills with freelance copywriting. I was able to build my career in freelance copywriting. I'd been struggling to get into financial copywriting, and suddenly that whole world opened up to me. It was all about discovering that you will sell more by focusing on less.
So you've been writing copy even before you were doing it full time as a living. How many years total have you been writing copy?
Since 2005. I discovered this world of copywriting in 2005. And within 6 months, I had a full-time job. Now, that was for a company that wasn't a direct response company. So I was writing product descriptions. I was writing email newsletters. I was writing some landing pages, but not sales letter landing pages, like pay-per-click landing pages to get people to go to the next page on the site. And basically, I came in as somebody who was like a marketing assistant, but the old marketing guy had just moved up to president of the company. And I was able to take on more and more responsibilities in that business until basically I was running all of their marketing and making many of the marketing decisions. And that was in 2005. And frankly, a lot of folks who want to become freelance copywriters, they want the freedom and they want it now. And they're afraid to do the work and make the commitments to really build their credibility. But, my wife had just gotten accepted for a PhD program at the University of Oregon. Now, she was fortunate enough and talented enough and qualified enough that they actually paid her a small stipend and paid her tuition to go through their PhD program. So she was barely making livable wages. And I recognized that I pretty much had to become the primary wage earner for our new family. And I needed security at that point. I needed the security of a full-time job. And I thought, if I'm going to have to do that, why not just do it in marketing? Even though I don't have experience, even though I don't have background in this area, I'll just dive in. And so that was starting in 2005. And I made copywriting a part of that job, a bigger part of that job than it ever was. And I've pretty much been writing nonstop since then.
So you've got your 10,000 plus hours in. How many years did you do this? I want to pick your brain about something because I'm working on a rant.
All right.
Well, I'm working on a rant for next month's issue of the Doberman Dan letter, which actually was started with last month's issue or this current month's issue. But
okay.
So I'll explain more where I'm going in a minute. But how many years before you felt like, hey, I'm really good at this?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm writing about a very similar concept that I had both instant wins and I still feel like I suck.
Mm-hmm. Very normal.
Yeah. So I had a lot of successes out of the gate that really fueled my ego and fueled the confidence that I could take on new things. But also I occasionally just kind of get my head handed to me, or I'm sitting there writing and I feel like what's coming out is just, nowhere near the caliber that it should be. And so, I started making my living. Well, let me tell you a very, very, very specific story. I started making my living from marketing pretty much right away, and I was feeling good about it, and I was feeling a little cocky about it, and I was feeling, all these things that had me reassured that I was on the right track. And I went into my boss at the time. I went into his office, and this is somebody who's still a friend today. Actually, he just asked me to sit on the board of his new company, but I went into his office at the time, and I had come up with all these numbers to attribute what my value was. And I was saying, a good freelance copywriter gets paid this percentage of sales, and this is how much sales I've generated in the last 12 months through my marketing, and this justifies why you should give me this amount of a raise. And then he basically said, well, Roy, I don't think you understand. A freelance copywriter is responsible for things like their own insurance, their own overhead. They buy their own computer, this, that, and the other thing. And so if we look at the total amount that we invest in you on a yearly basis, you're making about the right amount of money. I was like, oh. Yeah. So I clearly had some confidence at that point. And there were, lots of little campaigns and stuff that I did that had me feeling pretty confident. But at the same time, like, we always feel like we're becoming. We always feel, at least anybody who's serious about their growth, we always feel like we're taking the next step and the next step and the next step. And, I can say that I pretty much right away, by getting a marketing job where I wasn't responsible for all the results, I was able to make my living within 6 months, because that's kind of what's available to somebody who's ambitious in marketing. But at the same time, I was not ready to become a freelancer for 4 or 5 years. I probably could have become one faster than I did, but it was a pretty good gig and I was pretty comfortable there. But my wife was finishing up her PhD program, so we were primed for another move across the country. And so it was just time. And so, 5 years in, I was ready to become a full-time freelancer and start making a decent living that way. But at the same time, freaking every day I face challenges. So I'm, you'll never feel like you've arrived, but if you're waiting for that, you'll also never get the wins. You'll also never get you'll also never develop the real experience that it takes to arrive, or at least take your next step.
That's a good point. I've noticed something about copywriters, and I went through it too. And it amuses me now when I get to see young guys go through it, like some of the guys that I introduced to Agora, or some of the nights in my marketing Camelot. So I had an immediate success with my first foray into direct response marketing and copywriting. Of course, that was after 9 years of serial entrepreneurial failure, probably 25 plus failed businesses over a 9-year period. So, but yet my first piece of sales copy I wrote was a success. Now it wasn't some direct mail piece that mailed millions. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar success, but pretty big success for me, because it created a mail order business that got me free of my full-time job, which was the whole goal of starting all these businesses in the first place. So I had a success right out of the gate. And then follow-ups to that, like writing copy to sell products on the back end, the copy doesn't need to be that good to do that. So I had successes there. And, a few years into it, probably 7 years, even up to the 10-year mark, I thought I was pretty damn good. And I really got to the point where I thought, I can write copy for anything. I can sell anything. I can make any product a success, and was feeling pretty cocky. And now that I've been doing it, coming up on almost a quarter of a century, now it's the complete opposite. Now, most of the time, I feel like, at the 7 to 10 year mark, I thought like, yeah, I really know this. Now I feel like I know nothing. I'm asking rookies stuff, like people who just started working for Agora. I pick their brains like, hey man, how do you get your big ideas? How do you do that? I literally feel like I know nothing. And yeah, I was going to say half the time, but it's actually more than that. A majority of the time, I feel like I suck.
K9 crew, I know you were just getting into that, but we have to cut the episode. We'll be back next week with part 2 of the Roy Furr interview next time. Thanks for tuning in. K9 crew, before you run off, I want to remind you, Doberman Dan has set up an off-the-chain hotline. Call in, tell us you love us. It's even better if you tell us you hate us. It doesn't matter what you say. All you have to do is call in, leave a message. The number is 321-424-6043. Again, off-the-chain hotline, 321-424-6043.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.